So good morning. Good morning, everyone. Welcome in Bologna to the first international conference on the transition project. I would like to call here Emanuela Carbonara, full professor of political economy of the Department of Sociology and Business Law, and she's also the deputy head of our department. And we thank her for her institutional greetings that opened the conference.
Thank you. Thank you. So, dear colleagues, dear guests, it's a great pleasure and an honor to open today's conference and to welcome you on behalf of the Department of Sociology and Business Law to the launch of this Trancityons Transitions project. I don't know how you pronounce it. So let me begin by warmly thanking Professor Claudia Golino and the entire project team for imagining, designing, and coordinating such a timely, ambitious initiative. And I go on extending my gratitude to all of you here today, to colleagues from across the University of Bologna, our external partners, our international guests. Your presence speaks to the richness and the plurality of this project. So the intellectual scope of Transitions is impressive. It goes from law, philosophy, history, psychology, and last but not least, sociology. Its impact reaches far beyond academia, which is a very good thing, not only because we must produce good research, but we also must produce good public engagement. And so this is a very good thing. So this project speaks directly to the societies we live in, to the cities we inhabit. Now, I'm an economist, as Professor Golino was saying, and so today I would like to approach very briefly this discussion as an economist. So what does a project on democratic transition, on the urban memory, have to do with economics? And so the first thing I was asking myself, and so the first thing that comes to my mind is as a deep connection, because the city in this project becomes a public good. So it's a system of institutions, of infrastructures, of relationships, norms, both social and legal norms, symbols, memories. And so cities can have the potential to generate institutional capital, relational value, and social cohesion. And in a sense, as Stefano Zamagni has long argued, the cities can contribute to the relational well-being of their inhabitants, and so form our civil society. In a sense, can help us to grow personally, but also can enhance our well-being. So cities in this project, I was reading this project, very interesting project, become in a sense constitutional actors, if I may. I'm speaking to constitutional lawyers here. So cities have the ability to anticipate, to promote, to pressure legal orders to adapt. And so they become a sort of bottom-up dimension of the constitutional life that is often overlooked. So in a sense, a case in point in this respect could be Bologna. We are in Bologna. So in the decades following World War II, Bologna became a laboratory of democratic urban governance with participatory planning, decentralized institutions. So it became the first place to, put in practice the newly born constitution, Italian constitution. So it was the city, not the government, that actually made the constitutional rights visible and somehow tangible and livable. But as an economist, I'm always I have to say, interested in causal directions. So where is the causality goes? Is it in a sense the city that can drive the democratic transition, or it is the democratic transition, the social transition that shapes cities? And this is, I think, a very interesting question that this project addresses. And somehow brings me to what I would call the dangerous paradox of democracy. Democracy, is nowadays somehow undermined, democratically undermined. And this has happened in the past already. What we are witnessing now is a cycle in which the citizens, bottom up, elect and support institutions that then restrict the participation, the pluralism, the civil liberties. So I was saying that this has happened before with the fascism in Italy, with the Nazism that emerged through electoral consensus. So today's movement is more subtle, but it's still, I believe, it's dangerous. So that's why, in a sense, this project is so timely and it's so important, because by studying the bottom-up, process of democratization, it also looks at the top-down, cycle of democratization. So somehow this project acknowledges, it seems to me, that democratic transitions must find a constitutional equilibrium between the bottom-up vitality, civic participation, and the top-down guarantees of rights, norms, and shared values. So I think that what is important, and why it is so important that there are scholars and the civil society studying this transition process, is that cities should be built in order to protect democracies. And so there are questions that need to be addressed, like, will our cities remain spaces of openness? Will they become instruments of exclusion? Will they help preserve the memory, the historical memory of a democratic transition, or will they silence it? Will the public space support the participation, or will it teach us to obey and stay silent? I believe that this project is very brave, is very courageous, because it has the courage to ask these questions. And so I'm very eager to witness the discussion that will be that we'll have today here in this room. And I wish you all a stimulating, open, and courageous conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Emanuela. You said a lot of this project, and thank you very much for your passionate in greetings this morning. Well, again, good morning to everyone, and really thank you very much for being here today. For me, it is a real great honor to welcome you to this international conference, which we know, the official launch of the project. The project is called Trancityons, or transitions, when you just refer to transition. What does it mean, Trancityons? Transitions means transitions, cities, and democracy. I'm very pleased to have all partners of the project here today after the intensive work that we have last year together. So it's a real pleasure for me to have you all here from all over Italy and from abroad. So thank you very much again. Let me also thank our department and the interaction that our department makes with the other departments involved, because managing a project today is not so easy. We face every day many difficulties, and this is another challenge within this project. So thank you very much to all departments, to all the departments involved that are managing the projects, and to all the partners that are interacting with the project itself. So thank you very much to the institutions, and let me thank also Leonardo Pasqui and Francesca Neiroz, because they really made possible the organization of this conference today. So thank you very much, because your work is every day important to the project. My role today is to present the essential elements and the objectives of the project, and to explain, of course, very briefly, what are the contents of the conference today. Just start from the essential elements and of the project and its objectives. The fundamental objective of Trancityons is to foster, Emanuela somehow already said something about it, is to foster a new understanding of the crucial role of urban spaces in the democratization process. This project conceptualizes cities as a vibrant center where diverse identities, religions, social dynamics interact, capable, of course, of either facilitating democratic advancement or resisting authoritarian forces. By studying democratic transitions, the project aims to understand how urban realities, urban spaces that are featured by a mix of interests and identities contribute to disseminate European values and contribute with a significant effort to the constitutional and institutional evolution. Therefore, cities just recover a unique position. Okay, and this position, as both recipients and influencers of national constitutional movements, highlight their critical role in the democratization process. The changes that we face in the urban context every day, indeed, are crucial signals of understanding the path of modern European democracies have embarked upon, and what knowledges needs to be protected and promoted, safeguarded and promoted. So this analysis that we are going to promote with the project extend to the notion that cities can function as a true agent of change in the emerging of a democratic order. So in this perspective that I've just mentioned, through the essential elements of the project and through the objective of the project, we can summarize the whole concept that we just mentioned through some key themes and key words. You just can see them here graphically represented, where democratic transition and cities are the main dimensions of the project, and you can find within the space all the other dimensions that we are going to talk about in a while. So democratic transition, authoritarian regimes, European identity, gender, political systems and institutions, governance, urban democracy, and cities. Let me say something about the approach, the methodology that we use right in the project, because this is very important to understand the project itself. So we have different approaches. The first two that I like to mention are the historical and the comparative approaches to the project. It is important then to underline that the project adopts an historical point of view and a comparative key. Concerning the comparative key, in particular, the project investigates democratic transitions across three distinct contexts. The first is the Italy after World War II, The second one is Eastern Europe following the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1989, with a specific focus on Poland. We have here Jagiellonian University for this focus, and post-Yugoslav wars concentrating on East European countries such as Serbia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Croatia. So this analysis seeks to provide a profound insight into the development of national democratic systems and the active promotion of European Union principles and values. It also connects past transitions with the EU's contemporary challenges concerning, for example, the rule of law and its ongoing enlargement processes. On the other hand, the other key lens is is just connected to the importance of memory in comprehending current phenomena, of course, and asserting that cities serve as the primary lens through which we can examine democratic transition of past, present, and of course, future. So changes and evolutions within the urban context are considered crucial indicators for understanding the direction of modern European democracies, and as I've already said, to the knowledge that must be safeguarded and promoted. Just beside the comparative approach and the historical approach, we do not underline the importance of the interdisciplinary approach that is used to has been used to construct our project. This project is strongly interdisciplinary. I just mentioned some departments, and the project integrates perspective from various academic fields such as law, philosophy, sociology, and psychology, as Emanuela Carbonara just mentioned before. This multidisciplinary dialogue aims to provide a deep understanding of the complex relationship between cities, democracies, democratic values, and European values. It explores the role of cities from both a top-down perspective, the historical and the institutional dynamics, and a bottom-up perspective, like the lived experience of democracy within urban contexts. A significant and relevant element of the methodology adopted in the project is the integration of a gender perspective across all the activities of the project, from design to research analysis. Specific workshops and activities are dedicated to this perspective, to highlighting the crucial role of women in democratic transitions, with a specific focus on the role of migrant women for providing enrichment to the urban democratization. Just few words to the project activities. The project activities are broadly categorized into four main types. Academic conferences, like the one that we are here today. Collaborative research with citizens. This involves citizen science questionnaires conducted in Bologna and Krakow, engaging university students and citizens to explore how urban contexts influence the conceptualization of rights and democratic participation. Then we have citizen engagement activities. This category includes a range of public engagement efforts, like public debates organized in Rome by Lo Spiegone, which is a partner of the project, aiming to empower youth for civic engagement. Workshops organized by MondoDonna, to raise awareness about gender equality and the experiences of women in urban transition. Traveling photographic exhibitions in Belgrade, Sarajevo, and Zagreb, organized by Centro Cooperazione Internazionale e Osservatorio Balcani e Caucaso, to reflect on the impact of the Yugoslav wars on cities and the role of civil society in democratic transitions. And then we have many specialized training activities for our PhD students. Let me say something about our consortium. The consortium of the project is formed by 7 different organizations, strategically combined by academic institutions, civil society organizations, to ensure a comprehensive research and effective dissemination of findings. The first institution that I mentioned is our University of Bologna, that has the role of coordinating the whole project. The Bologna team just comprehend our Department of Sociology and Business Law, the Department of Legal Studies, the Department of Philosophy. Then we have the University of Jagiellonian in Krakow, in Poland, Osservatorio Balcani e Caucaso Transeuropa, Unione Province Italiane Emilia-Romagna, Associazione MondoDonna, Lo Spiegone e l'Istituto Storico Parri di Bologna Metropolitana. So after this very brief presentation, here we come to the conference program, Democratic Transitions and Urban Contexts, New Norms and New Cities. The event brings together all partners of the project, so I'm very pleased that you are all here today, as I already said, to explore the crucial role of cities in democratic transitions, both within and beyond the European Union. Throughout the whole day, we will engage in 4 thematic panels addressing the importance of memory, European Union values, cognitive perspectives on democracy, and the future perspectives of cities in the urban context. So we are very honored to host experts from multiple institutions and countries, as I said, and we really thank you very much for being here today. Have a nice day, enjoy. I just remember that we have the first 2 panels, then we have light lunch together in the Boschereccia downstairs, and then we have the second 2 panels for arriving to the final remarks of Professor Federico Casolari at the end of the day. So enjoy your day. Thank you very much again for being here. I just forgot to call to the the first panel. So I just ask Michele Belletti, Corrado Caruso, Paul Blokker, Giulia Prandini to come here for the first panel. Sorry, I just forgot the it was quite.
Good morning to everybody. Good morning. And for the first thing, I have to say thank you to Claudia to have involved me in this project. Another person of our group of research of public law and from sociology. And I think this is important research, and this is an important conference, because I think maybe the first time in which the city is studied by this way of thinking, and the democracy is studied in a new way of thinking. This way of connection from city, democracy, and transition, I think is maybe, perhaps, one of the most important project. And I think from the point of view of constitutional law, I think a new way of studying the city. But in this moment, nowadays, I'm only the chair of this panel. An important panel where the speaker will talk about cities and democratic transition, the importance of memory. We can hear Blokker from the University of Bologna, Corrado Caruso from the University of Bologna. If I'm not wrong, you are the president of Constitutional Court in EmiliaRomagna. It's right. Yes. Yeah. I was the president of Constitutional Court in the Common of Bologna, Collegio dei Garanti. Oh, a lot about we are everybody. It's like a Constitutional Court. When it was born, this institution was thinking in this time, in that way. And we can hear here at the end Giulia Prandini from MondoDonna. I only give to speech the chair, the person which had to speak. But at the end, I would like to speak something about this issue. We can hear now Paulus Albert Blokker from the University of Bologna. How many times do they have? What they want? Oh, 15 minutes, a lot of time. 15 minutes like Lancaster. Do you know?
So 1 hour.
No, Lancaster. Do you remember? Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here at this conference, which, as has been said, I think is extremely topical, but I'm sometimes a bit in a pessimistic mood, and so you might also say maybe we come a bit too late. I use the Owl of Minerva a lot at recent times, but let's not be too pessimistic. And as I will, in my talk, I will just try to tie together actually what is the start of my academic career, working on, I tend to call it, I will explain that later, democratic transformation in Central and Eastern Europe, one of our areas of interest. And I will try to talk about that a little bit with the, the irritating academic hat on. Like I sort of use the idea of I told you so in a way, in the sense that I've been working on Central and Eastern Europe since late 1990s. And I think right from the start, I started indicating that I thought the democratic transformation in that part of the world was much more complex than it was being portrayed. And I think that in many ways bears out. But let me briefly show you the, I was in a very simplifying mood yesterday, I suppose, and so I set up a very simple outline of the argument. I start with transition. I will, by the way, try to sort of in an intellectual manner argue that I don't think transition is the right term. So that's not very good for the project, but I do have some constructive critique, so we can maybe use that in the project. Secondly, I will briefly talk about cities. I'm not an urban scholar, I'm a political sociologist, so we'll just try to tie in some dimensions that I think are important, and they also strongly relate to another hat that I'm wearing, perhaps also in this project, is that on the one hand, of course, I'm just like many of you, a very boring sort of ivory tower type of intellectual, but I'm also pretty much active in civil society, particularly on this topic. So trying to think about how can we resist, how can we keep on promoting things like human rights, gender rights, etc. And then finally, really, when my time is probably over for at least 5 minutes, I will say something about, indeed, the past, maybe less on memory, but more on the politics of memory and the politics of using the past, both in favor of democracy and against democracy. So the first argument is actually the way my ticket into academic life. My first article in English was actually talking about this topic, that is transition, democratic transition. And even in my PhD thesis, my main argument was that we tend to use the notion of transition in a very problematic manner. And you can see that very easily on the right, if you look at the way it was used in Central and Eastern Europe in the 1990s, it was basically the argument, to put it very bluntly, communism is bad, we need to get rid of this, we have to transition towards liberal democracy. And we know exactly what liberal democracy is, so we only need to put it into practice. That was the main argument. My argument today is that I think this argument is still with us, which I find really flabbergasting in many ways, because I think it has been proven wrong in so many different ways, that we probably also in this project want to deeply revisit a notion, a teleological notion, as I call it on this slide, of transition from point A to point B. And in the 1990s, it was a very strong argument about there's no alternative to liberal democracy. Fukuyama has been cited to death on this, the end of history, etc. Where I think there was a double mistake. First of all, there was much too little interest in what communism meant and what the end of communism meant. And secondly, there was much too little interest in what liberal democracy, or democracy more in general, actually means in practice, and how can you try to stimulate a democratic society in a more durable manner. So transition, and that's the way I sort of take it on critically, is part of a political science debate, which has often been designated as transitology, so the science of transition. And that's exactly the argument I try to argue against. And so the debate in the 1990s also said we shouldn't be using the word transition, which seems indeed unilinear, teleological, but we should use a notion like transformation. We don't really know where that transformation will wind up. We actually don't really know where that transformation started. I mean, in my current work on, let's call it the conservative populist backlash in countries like Hungary, I try to claim that a lot of at least the intellectual foundations of what we now see in Orban Hungary were already there in the 60s, 70s, even part of the resistance movement. As we all know, Orban himself was a dissident, part of the Fidesz, the young sort of law student movement in Hungary. And so transformation might be a more useful term, because indeed it overcomes a number of the problems that we otherwise might reproduce. That is, one of the core issues is we just expect it. another term a lot used in the 1990s, a form of convergence. These countries like Poland and Hungary in particular were seen as the best students in the class, were just, if they adopted the right institutions, not least through the EU enlargement process, they would just slowly become as us. Today, I think it's interesting to think back about this. First of all, that probably didn't happen, that convergence. And second of all, does anyone still want to be like us? Because liberal democracies in Western Europe are not really what many would see as the end point where we want to wind up either. I mean, all countries in Europe face huge polarization, huge, as they call it, backlash, etc. And so a lot of problems in this, what I call transitology mindset, were already there in the 1990s, and probably already earlier in discussions on democratization in Southern Europe, in Latin America, etc. So this slide is actually not entirely correct. The first line below transitology mindset should actually say no divergence or no recognition of persistent difference. So no interest really in how Hungary was very different from Poland, was very different from what at the time was still Czechoslovakia, was even more different from Romania, and what kind of results, effects this might have had on the transition project. They all went through the same sort of loop they had to jump through in the EU enlargement conditionality-based process. They had to adopt 32 or something chapters of EU law to become full-blown EU member states, and with that, liberal democracies. But recognizing that these countries actually came from very different historical trajectories was not really taken into account. Social change, very ill understood, I think, at least for a sociologist, where I suppose most of us would agree that we can't really know where social change will go, where it will wind up. Of course, we might be interested in causality, like economists might be, and even sociologists are ever more interested in that as well. But it doesn't mean we can entirely foresee where social change winds up. So that's also maybe a problem that is embedded in a notion like transition. Another thing I feel very strongly about is that the main look at transition and processes of democratization was about what kind of procedures and institutions were adopted, and hence the conditionality process, as an example, focusing on formal institutional change. Very little attention for change on the ground, for civil society, for indeed changes in urban cities that were heavily affected by forms of introduction of capitalism, etc. And sociologically speaking, most problematic perhaps, very little interest in underlying struggles around indeed ideas, national, regional identity, forms of social relationships in forms of social capital, etc. And so you might say, in a way, I say it on the slide, is a negative approach to the past, but maybe just even a complete ignorance of the past. I mean, just between brackets, there's now an enormously interesting set of young historians in Central and Eastern Europe that is completely revisiting how communism and law worked and what kind of effects that had on the actual democratic transition in the 90s. In the 1990s, almost no one talked about that. And so with that past in our minds, in a way, the capacity now to reflect on what happened actually in these democratic transitions, it's interesting to see that indeed nowadays we should be very, very critical of any notion of a democratic transition, because it was effectively Poland and Hungary, particularly Poland, where there was the most important mass sort of protest and resistance against the communist regime. These two countries that were the most effective democratizers, you might say, are now front runners in a very problematic direction of illiberal, whatever you want to call it, type of democracy. And so we probably not only need to reassess what is happening in the region in terms of democratization, but we also, I think, need to reassess how we actually looked at those processes from the start. And this is not only for us scholars, but I don't think anyone from the European Commission is here at the moment, but I would invite also, indeed, practitioners, policymakers to start rethinking what democratic transition means. Otherwise, there's a great risk of falling again in the same type of trap. And so backsliding, in my view, nicely fits into this transitological language. Backsliding is the opposite of democratic transition. It's in a way very simple, the way it is being looked at. So you're not arriving at the end point that we expected liberal democracy, so then you have to be returning to the status quo ex ante. Again, nobody or very few people reflect on what was that status quo ex ante really about. And for instance, I find it fascinating, although also very scary, the extent to which Orban Hungary reflects some of the core dimensions of the communist regime in a slightly different manner. But the way, for instance, civil society is being addressed in Budapest, in other Hungarian cities, the way public protest is being made more and more difficult, the way they're now even talking about taking citizenship away from dual citizens to prevent them from voting in next year's elections. These are tactics that are not unlike things that happened also in communism. And so I think a lot of analysis nowadays falls into the exact same problematic trap of the 1990s, simplifying what is the democratic transition, simplifying what is backsliding, and understanding backsliding basically as an anormality, a deviation from the normal path of democratization. So what we need to do is basically, well, first get rid of the nasty populists, and secondly, use again that institutionally based type of set of policies to rebuild the rule of law and democracy. Well, just between parentheses, if you look at the case of Poland, and I get very dramatic emails from colleagues from Poland after the last presidential elections, it's not so simple. Poland has not been now necessarily, as they call it, front sliding, and it's slowly becoming again a liberal democracy. My argument would be it probably never was really a liberal democracy in a sort of consolidated sense. If we would have looked closer in the 90s, we would have seen it. Just think about the huge struggle about adopting the new constitution that was then adopted in 1997. A case in point. I probably need to speed up, but the chair doesn't intervene, so okay. So related to that, I think is also is an interesting dimension that, which I think is a trend also in democratization studies, is understanding democracy not from a sociological or a full-blown political science point of view, or not even a legal point of view, but from an engineering point of view. And so we just need to find the right institutional indicators, and in that way we can then just understand where democracy is going, where we need to push buttons to put it back into a line. And the map you see here is from the famous Varieties of Democracy VDEM project that is now developing its forecasting tool based indeed on indicators that then show us which countries are going the wrong way and which not. I think this is a hugely problematic way to go. It's again papering over real life experiences, for instance, from civil society actors or Hungarian academics in Budapest that are struggling on the ground to keep some kind of democracy alive. And I guess to make a deeper point, you could say actually that this is a classical modernist dream of you can fully, society is fully malleable. If you have the right information, you can push it into the right direction. I think reality is much more messy and not entirely calculable. And so, well, I need to speed up because I have only very few minutes left, maybe not even a minute. And so my point would be we need to pay a lot of attention to actual conflict and struggle on the ground. And that brings me, let me briefly, quickly go forward That brings me to the cities. Let me leave this for what it is for now. Cities, in that sense, are crucial. On the one hand, as you can see here as well, on the right upper hand corner is Timișoara, December 1989, huge uprisings against Ceausescu, which then later also emerged in Bucharest, major factor in changes in these countries. On the bottom right, you see the recent Saturday's No Kings protest in the US, also very urban in many ways, and maybe not as effective as the Ceausescu protests, but let's hope, at least that would be my view, that they will work out one of these days. So cities are a democratic space. They are a laboratory for democratic action. They can be understood in many ways as democratic spaces that also allow civil society actors and associations, etc., to emerge. But we shouldn't forget that they can also be the exact opposite. And again, Budapest is a case in point. The Central European University has been chased away. It's still there with its Democracy Institute, etc., but it's not really powerful anymore. But the city is now full of all kinds of urban-related think tanks like the Danube Institute, Matthias Corvinus Collegium, etc. They are also very active with their very different view of illiberal democracy, or I would say rather conservative forms of authoritarianism. And so we need to factor that in. Cities are a space that nurtures action, but not necessarily democratic action. I was at Budapest 2 weeks ago, speaking to people working at the last public university, ELTE, it was Lorand University. Their stories were not particularly optimistic, to put it mildly. They don't even want to go on the streets anymore as representatives of the university because they face, they fear major crackdown. And so that's the reality on the ground in some of the European cities. And hence, I would say we should understand cities as spaces of struggle, of continuous interaction between all kinds of forces. Here I painted in a bit of a black and white picture, but in reality it's much more complex. There are all kinds of different actors that push into certain direction. And also the center right or even the radical right is a very variegated bunch of actors. And that I think also an important part of the story. I will really wind up now. So very briefly about the past then indeed. Cities then have always been spaces of conflict and struggle. They have been so in the transitions in the 1990s. They are even also currently spaces for struggle. And in that sense, the past, I think, is extremely important, like, for instance, invocations of communism or anti-communism, promotion of forms of nationalism, etc. But maybe one way to end up with a bit of a complex part of the story is I think a lot of these struggles could nowadays be sort of articulated in a kind of struggle between what Americans would call wokeism versus anti-wokeism. And I wanted to leave you with that because I think both of these are in themselves problematic ways of trying to revision the past. And so this is really about struggles of how to read the past and what does the past mean for the present. Anti-wokeism, of course, says a lot of things that directly affect our project. That is, it's often, if not always, very anti-gender, very much anti any LGBTQI. Think of the Budapest Gay Pride in a couple of days' time. And so a lot of these struggles then are about articulating positions of what we want democracy to be, how open we want democracy to be, how pluralism respecting we want democracy to be. And I think indeed cities are a core dimension there, but not only. Because I also feel that I'm very much active on the transnational level in European movements. One thing we should think about, and we can do this in this project, I think, is how can you link up cities? How can you link up publics, activists, etc., to make them stronger? And maybe that's an even more important message than just focusing on singular cities as such. I will stop there, and I went over time, big time, but I hope I can be forgiven.
Thank you, Paul. You speak for 20 minutes.
Oh,
But yeah, 20 minutes, but it's quite interesting what you say. And I think you are the most jurist of the of sociology's studies. You say something which is interesting to me. You say is not sufficient democratic system, but is necessary and one functionally democratic system. If you remember, we have talked about sometimes about direct election of premier or assembly form of government. And this is a way of thinking. These are two ways of thinking, but it's important that the most important thing is not democratic system, but democratic system we can function in a good way of form of government. Thank you, Paul. Now I have to give the now can I speak Corrado Caruso. You will speak about them.
The memory in public urban space.
Yeah, thank you. 50 minutes. And 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Claudia, for the involvement. Where is Claudia? Here, sorry. Claudia, Leonardo, and Francesca for this project and involvement. I'm very happy to be here and to introduce this short talk about the role of memory in urban and public spaces. And to do that, I'm just, as a brief premise, I will try to analytically define, before starting, the concept of memory and distinguishing from the similar but really different concept of history and public history. And then I will try to illustrate the relationship between memory and law, and constitutional law above all. And then I try to take some and to give you some examples drawn by the unreachable variety of Italian chronicles in order to highlight how memory wars in urban spaces are symptoms of the cleavages that mark a given community and therefore of a certain crisis, in this sense, a transition within a given society. So let's try to distinguish and to clarify the boundaries between memory and history. The difference is basically an epistemological difference. They are the two concepts are entrenched in different epistemologies. Memory does not exhaust history; it's only one of its sources. Likewise, historical knowledge alone is insufficient to recreate existential remembrance, and memory keeps the past alive in the present, while history frames it in a closed temporal order, conventionally and artificially divided into periods. Memory arises from lived experience and follows a nonlinear associative way, and while history starts from the past, relying on rational inquiry and verifiable evidence, history as a method, while memories is, I would say, recalls kind of intuition about the perception of a certain event. Memory tends to neglect context and highlights the uniqueness of experience. History, whilst history applies a linear structure and seeks generalizations. So memory revives an event and demands emotional engagement. It makes present what is absent. History instead aims to explain events through a causal chain, and this requires critical distance. So memory and history are in a relation which is basically complementary, and they play complementary roles in shaping our understanding of the past. Memory as there is a strict relation and connection between memory and values. And memory expresses an ethical and relational act, reflecting a sense of justice and injustice, and thus promoting conflict on justice and injustice. Memory contributes to shaping individual and collective identity, transforming single isolated individuals and groups into a community, a Gemeinschaft, that bind together through the sharing of values certain groups and individuals. This identity is not static, it's dynamic. It promotes an ongoing sense of belonging and political integration, fostering civic cohesion. Of course, as I told you before, if not shared, if there is uncertainty on the values that memory recalls, memory can become a source of political conflict. So of course there is a tight connection between memory and constitution and constitutional law in a broader sense. Of course, constitution, as you probably know, gives legal shape to the political unity of the people. It expresses a material need for integration. So it poses an aspiration towards unity through shared constitutional values. And so public memory serves this integration strategy, serves a strategy to fulfill the integrative function of the Constitution. So we can call here memory plays a role in posing a material integration, so an integration through values, through symbols that recall these kind of values. So the role played by memory operates on two different levels, and this has helped me to introduce the problem of memory within urban spaces. The two levels are national and local. Basically, at the national level, memory is shaped through memorial laws. This law establishes what must be remembered, for example, the institution of national holidays or national days, or how it must be remembered a certain event. Think about, for example, the criminal laws against fascist apology or Holocaust denial and so on. At the local level, memory-related conflicts often involve urban spaces, and here the role of the law is more nuanced, I would say, and the memory conflicts in urban space include disputes over place names, for example, toponymy, the use of municipal spaces, and the memorial symbols such as, for example, statues and monuments. So let's take some example from the Italian experience. I would say that a paradigmatic example of the conflicts that can involve the urban spaces are connected with the fascist legacies. For example, at the local level, memory conflicts often concern the naming of uses of public spaces after fascist or neo-fascist individuals or organizations. For example, the naming of municipal streets after Giorgio Almirante. Giorgio Almirante was the former leader, historical leader of the neo-fascist Movimento Sociale Italiano, which inherited the legacy of the Partito Nazionalfascista. The use of municipal halls by neo-fascist associations that are required to formally declare adherence to the constitutional values and rejection of fascist ideology. And also the use and the choice to entitle monuments to people that were involved in the fascist regime. For example, this little but I would say important, relevant case of the mayor of the municipality of Affile. Affile is a small village close to Rome. The mayor and the local officials were charged with the crime of fascist advocacies for dedicating a shrine in a public park to General Rodolfo Graziani, who was a prominent figure of fascist colonialism and Minister of Defense. It was probably the first man who gave consistency to the word of genocide in the Libyan territories in the early 20s. And this small shrine was conceived as a memorial to fallen soldiers from Affile in the two world wars, but then it was formally dedicated to Graziani and became basically a public advocacy of the past regime, the fascist regime. So these cases entered into law through the adjudication and the, of the major jurisdictional organs of the Italian Republic, namely the Italian Council of State and the Court of Cassation, that issued different rulings on these topics, on these cases. For example, through a formal scrutiny, the Council of State, which is the major administrative course in Italy, rejected judicial challenges to the municipal resolution on street naming, the municipality of Grosseto, which decided and deliberated to dedicate a street to Giorgio Almirante, as in the example that I recalled just a couple of minutes before. And through a substantial scrutiny, the Council of State denied requests by neo-fascist association against municipal regulation on space use. So these rulings are often based on the 12th transitional and final provision of the Constitution, which prohibits the reconstitution of the dissolved fascist party, thereby creating a binding ideological threshold. So there was no, I would say, coherent in this adjudication, this case law, because, for example, the Council of State did not enter into the way and into the deliberation process which assessed and decided to entitle a street to Giorgio Almirante, but on the other side of the token, the Council of State basically stated that asking for I would say an adherence form by the neo-fascist association was due by the 12th transitional and final provision of the Constitution. So this association must sign an engagement on the use of the municipal halls to not make fascist propaganda or fascist advocacies within these public spaces. Coming back to the case of Affile, the Italian Court of Cassation annulled the conviction of the mayor and the other local officials that was charged in first and second degree for fascist advocacy, because the court held that the act of entitled this park and shrine to Graziani did not pose a clear and present danger of reconstituting the dissolved fascist party. And so failing to meet the legal threshold required for criminal liability under the transitional and final provision of the 12th final provision of the Italian Constitution. So different cases, different outcomes that actually, I would say, underline the political conflict on memory can become also legal conflict on memory, on the way of remembrance. So contradiction, political conflict, legal conflict, but also we can notice another character of these memory wars in Italy. And these conflicts are, I would say, political, inherently political, they relate to the ideology, ideologies and to the political parties that play a central role in the country's pluralist democracy. So these cleavages are political cleavages, are cleavages that are related to the struggles between the material subject of the Italian constitution, that are the parties, basically. And this characteristic distinguishes the Italian context from others, for example, from other contexts, such as the United States, where memory disputes are primarily cultural and only in a second stance political. For example, think about the controversies over the removal of monuments from urban space in the state, monuments that are considered heritage of slavery and the Civil War. In both cases, Italian and United States, these issues revolves around collective identity. But in the Italian case, these conflicts are basically political, strictly political, while in the American context, they are basically cultural. So memory conflicts promote divergent lines of action, because also in the United States, of course, the fact that in the first instance, these conflicts are cultural, then become political, and they reflect opposing vision of history and identity and channel distinct political strategies. And this is, and even if they are different, a common feature of this kind of conflict is that they consider public discourse on memory and on past events as a tool of power. So there is, I would say, an influence by Foucault and Nietzsche and in this contemporary approach that consider language and public discourse as instruments that reproduce power relations. So who control the public discourse and the discourse on memory control the power, and the power to shape the collective identity of a given community. So public discourse becomes basically a contested space where meanings are challenged and reconstructed, and memory becomes both a battlefield and a tool of integration. This is the final question, and I close with a final question, to which I don't have really an answer, but we can pose some questions and starting a discussion among us. And this conference gives us a good, I would say, occasion to discuss on this. In the contemporary age that is marked by polarization, political fractures, disinformation, how can public memory be re-examined without producing an official truth that threatens democratic pluralism? No easy answer at all. But for example, possible some, methodological responses can be set. And the first one is that we should proceed case by case, fostering open, transparent debate around each contested memory. And the second response can be to avoid memory laws, which are stereotyped and highly normative. There is an Italian constitutional scholar wrote an article 7-8 years ago, probably, and he enumerated the numbers of memory laws approved or to be approved by the Italian Parliament, and there was a kind of multiplication of events that should be remembered, legally remembered in the Italian political community, so stereotyping the very act of remembering and dropping consistency the act of remembrance. I would concentrate, and the third step is to concentrate on urban spaces that play a crucial role in shaping collective memory more effectively than symbolic memorial laws, because unlike these laws, which impose a specific way of remembering through legal norms, urban spaces make memory visible and situated, answering this the past events in a shared physical context. So this is all for now, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Corrado. You have talked about 17 minutes. Great. Corrado talked about a kind of memory inside the city. What's the matter if you have to go in a street entitled to Giorgio Almirante? You don't, yeah, you go a longer street Great. I was thinking about this. Thank you very much. Now we can hear the speech of Giulia Prandini, and you can talk.
Good morning, everyone. I'm very glad to be here and to be part of this very needed project. This contribution aims to briefly illustrate some social processes that took place in Bologna, which became a fertile ground for the affirmation of needs and rights of immigrant women in the last decades of the 20th century. The contribution takes into account the social and legislative context in the aftermath of the Second World War, specifically focusing on the decades spanning the 1980s and the early 2000s. The approach seeks to reconstruct the work of some organizations such as MondoDonna, in the territory, in the area of Bologna, that had been active since the 1980s to address the needs of a very specific vulnerable category. That means immigrant women that didn't have social or family support networks. MondoDonna began addressing these needs in a national context where there wasn't an organic and a systemic national system that regulates the presence of immigrants in the countries, their working conditions, or their refugee status. Briefly, the significance of migration in Italy dates back in the 60s and 70s, when at the time people fled from the former fascist colonies, such as Somalia, Eritrea, and Ethiopia. And they were mainly students or workers, male and female. But actually, the importance of this phenomenon was stressed only in the late 70s. At the time, a report of the Italian Research Institute of Economic and Social Condition revealed that at the national territory were present at the time around 500,000 foreigners. And that was a phenomenon that was far from being marginal, but at the time was more or less ignored. We have to think that the very first immigration law in Italy dates back to 1986, if I'm not wrong. Before that, there was just a Ministry of Labor, a circular that was regulating the phenomenon. And another element that I'd like to stress is that about international protection at the time, the status as a refugee could be asked and given only for those who were coming from the ex-Soviet Union states, thanks to a clause that couldn't allowed to ask for this type of protection as refugees to other immigrants. And that was abolished only in 1990. So going back to the context of Bologna, in 1980, a large community was settled in the area. They were mainly people coming from, as it was true for the national territory, from the north of Africa. That means Ethiopia, Egypt, and other countries. And that was because Bologna at the time was a strong point of attraction due to its ability to offer jobs in the industrial sector, mainly for male labor. The presence of immigrant women were more related to the family reunification processes, which brought and kept women in the city who lacked other family or social network. In this Italian legislative context, MondoDonna began to document the situation of a particularly vulnerable group of women that were without employment and isolated from their social and family environments. So they were mainly women that fled from their countries, searching for that could be rejected from their family, or who had come to Italy through family reunification processes that after failed. So they were left mainly unsupported by their husband, and they didn't have access to economic resources, or didn't have employment opportunity or any form of social or family support. At the time in Bologna, the only available network that could help them were mainly local parishes and Caritas, and it is evident in this stress the religious identity of this type of help was undeniable. And beside that, there wasn't an institutional services or integrated responses to their needs. So MondoDonna identifies these urgent gaps, and starting in the late 80s, became a spokesperson and after a driving force behind this much needed shift. So what happened? The associations began with the creation with a women-led organizations that was made from members from different nationality and different background. And the very first service was to open a facility in the center of Bologna, in a very historical neighborhood, offering accommodation and care for women that were facing economic and housing difficulties. The name of the center was Merlani Center. So MondoDonna played a key role to build an territorial network and to play an advocacy role. It created a coordination table with the main emergency shelter providers in Bologna that were, as we said, Caritas, local parishes, but also a few other organizations such as Papa Giovanni XXIII or Padre Giovanni Marella. This collaboration was important to identify the beneficiaries that could enter and be hosted in the center and be supported in building their skills and abilities for facilitate the access to the labor market and gain their economic independence and their inclusion. So specifically, there was a multidisciplinary equipe of mediators and other professionals from different nationalities that helped those women in building tailored job placement paths. And they were dealing and doing agreement with local companies for give them a work, and it was actually an internship that after that became a successful employment. And they were also supported in accessing public housing. So at the time, that was defined as a pilot and progressive experiment that lay the foundation for the integration reception services for single women or women with children, involving local institutions and private actors throughout the 1990s as a model that started there but continued after that to evolve. So, between 80s and 90s in the area of Bologna, different type of association and local entities started to address this need of immigrant women and vulnerable target and start to work together, and they played a key intermediary role between individuals and institutions such as Centro di Documentazione Donna o Casa delle Donne. And that was very important for driving the social change that went through. We have to consider also that in those years, in 1990s, the very first anti-violence center was open, and the very first one at national level was opened here in Bologna. By an association created by feminist intellectual and activists. That was a group of work and research on gender-based violence. And that after that, it follows the opening of other centers in Rome and Milan before they spread in the whole territories as it is nowadays. And this moment, that was a pioneering momentum, was remarks this social awareness and progressive vision across multiple levels, starting from individual to the association and the institution that work together to create and drive this needed change about rights that at the moment were completely ignored. Okay, MondoDonna. MondoDonna start this thanks to its work and thanks to the work she was doing inside Merlani Center and other centers that opened later then, could understand that most women hosted had experienced gender-based violence in various forms, domestic, sexual, psychological, and their condition of vulnerability was rooted in a structural gender inequality. And another key element was that all of those women were not aware of this common rooted condition of what they had experienced, and that made them not willing to search for the right help that services that were established on the territory were offering. So it became clear to MondoDonna and to other organizations that were at the moment working with migrant women that it was important to stress and to make clear these common roots and to help those to find a specific support to help them find the appropriate pathways to care. Okay. And that was out of this awareness that after the opening of the various anti-violence centers at national levels, MondoDonna initiated the process to become an officially accredited anti-violence centers that happened in 2033. And after that, other help desks were open on the territory thanks to the principle of the proximity of the needs. So by now in Bologna, MondoDonna is has opened 14 help desks and other 6 in the region of Romagna. So this analysis of the context and developments since the 1980s in Bologna shows how grassroots initiative, together with institutional efforts, responded to the needs of high vulnerable immigrant women. And this intervention was part of a broader strategy that helped reshape the system itself with cross-sectoral impact, because it involves immigration, health, social welfare, gender-based violence, and equal opportunities. And this collective action brought visibility to an otherwise not visible need and transformed it into, thanks to this effort, was capable of removing structural barriers to fundamental rights and democratic participation, and leads to a profound social change at a national level. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Thank you for your speech. Now, Corrado told me that he had to speak about the last slide. He forgot it. So,
and I would like to come back just for 1 minute to my presentation, because when I told you that the problem of remembering is a problem in Italy strictly political, and it witnessed kind of struggle between political parties, their past, their evolution. This is true, of course, for neo-fascist and post-fascist parties, but also, for example, for the Communist Party and the Democratic Party, because there is for example, here in Bologna, in Piazza dell'Unità, there was a plaque remembering a famous key partisan battle happened in 1944, and in this plaque there was this memory of this battle, but also it remembered the so-called Bolognina turn, so the moment where the Communist Party, after the falling of the Berlin Wall, enters in this period of transition and evolved from the Communist Party to a Social Democrat Party and then the Democratic Party. So, but 4 or 5 years ago, the plaque was changed. The plaque was changed in accordance with the Association of Partisans and the municipality, and now the plaque just remembered the partisan battle, and no mention at all is made with reference to the Bolognina turn, and so the turn of the Communist Party into a Social Democratic Party. And this is so there was a journalist who made an inquiry and tried to understand what was behind this change. Apparently didn't reach relevant results, but this is probably an event that confirm, the fact that behind the memory there are identity problem, political identity problem, and this also some evolution that it is not completely accepted by the same protagonists of the political life here in Italy. This is just to specify why I told you before that it was also a political partisan problem here, the problem of remembrance. Thank you, and sorry about that.
thank you, Corrado. Maybe for this party is too much. There is too much pluralism. Pluralism is important. Pluralism maybe is too much. I have to thank all the person who have the speech in this panel. If I can only say 2 words about the importance of democratic role of the city. The role of the city, in my opinion, is certainly important in terms of affirmation, implementation, democratic dynamic. I think about the law that changed the Italian political system was the law on the direct election of mayor. I speak especially with Corrado. This law on the direct election of mayor, which came into force shortly after the referendum on single preference, but at the same time, at the referendum that transformed the electoral laws at the national level from proportional law to majoritarian law. This affirmation, this is affirmed the passage from a system of democracy blocked at the center to a bipolar system based on the affirmation of the role of majority and opposition. From the point of view of constitutional law, I think the first law was the direct election of a measure. For what concerns the memory, most of the city we have seen, and we will see in this morning, an important role in the liberation from Nazi-fascism occupation. I think about Genoa, Naples, to give just two examples. Cities sometimes play an important role against terrorism, both terrorists of right and of left. Bologna, I want to remember this page of the story, was furiously hit by the right subversion with the massacre of the station on the 2 August. The city immediately recovered, not a few months later, but a few minutes after the massacre, when buses was used as important rescue vehicle to take the wounded to hospitals. That choice saved numerous human lives. I will never forget that dramatic morning. I remember it in every little detail, in every sensation, the sensation of an 11-year-old child who did not understand the drama of the event, but we perceived it clearly. Bologna has also been hit by the left subversion. The most recent case is the murder of Marco Biagi. But Bologna has always reached, always embracing the right side of the history, moderation, moderation, and the search of truth. At the end, I like to take a last thing. The importance of the role of the city in democratic process, we can find in the process of transformation, the province and metropolitan system. As regards the provinces, there has been no resistance in transforming that into second-level territorial entities with body not directly elected by the electorate, but rather with the second-level election by the representative of the municipality that constitutes the province. It should be noted, however, that this transformation of the provinces has made it more complicated from that identity to exercise its power, especially due to the restriction in allocation of funds to cover the cost of exercising the fundamental cost of service. As regard, instead, the metropolitan city, Bologna is a metropolitan city, since it concerns the government, from the point of view of the government, of the conurbation, which is essential constitute of a territorial entity without solution of continuity. The Constitutional Court has specified that at least the top body, the metropolitan measure, should be elected by universal and direct suffrage. I thank you to everybody, and I think this will be a great morning to talk about this issue. Thank you.
So in the time that we change the table, I just ask Federico Ferri, Olivia Pini, and Luca Sparnacci just to sit here with us for the second panel on cities promoting EU values, the role of local dimensions in defending the rule of law. So just few words. I just see Federico that is ready to talk, so I don't want to just steal any time of the table. Just a few words, just to say that I mean, I just already said before, but in a time where one of the most difficult challenges is to protect the rule of law and disseminate European Union values and principles, talking about the role of cities in the European enlargement process as main actors of democratic transition, I think is crucial. So I don't want, I just said, to steal time to the conversation and the dialogue. So I just leave the floor to Federico for his 15 minutes, more or less.
More or less. We'll try to. Okay, yeah. But I will try to be on time since I'm very tall and it's quite uncomfortable here. So 15 minutes, I think it's enough. Thanks, first of all, thanks, Professor Claudia Golino. Thanks a lot to Leonardo and Francesca for organizing these events and for running the project. And thanks for all the members of the audience for being here. What am I going to do today? A brainstorming, meaning that my aim is not to formulate research questions and to come to conclusions. I really want to, put on the table some sketches, some thoughts out loud, because I know that the key goal after these events will be to formulate research questions and to identify some patterns of analysis. Bearing in mind that, at least for me, the key challenge is to be confronted with experts in different disciplines, but this is very stimulating. It's an opportunity. Now, the plan of the intervention is simple. I will first touch upon a couple of concepts that, in my view, are quite relevant in the framework of the project. And then I will formulate some general considerations about two issues of a constitutional nature from an EU law perspective, then two EU target strategies, and I will conclude with a couple of external initiatives that somehow relates to the connection between the rule of law, and more in general, the values of the European Union, and the role that cities can play. Key concepts. I think this is the most boring thing that a boring scholar like me could do, but my aim in this case is to clarify that the scope of the project is way broad and that there are many things that can be done within this framework. The first concept is the one of cities or urban environments. And I decided to refer to the glossary of the European Union. I also consider some pieces of legislation, for example, Regulation 2017-2391, concerning, among the other things, urban areas. And urban areas include cities or densely populated areas, as you can see here, plus towns and suburbs. So if we consider urban areas, and this expression was heard today in this intervention and is present in the project proposal, I think that we have a wide landscape to work on. According to Eurostat and to a recent publication, if I'm not mistaken, it was issued last year in 2024, around 70% of the people living in the territories of the member state are located in urban areas. And this is particularly important if we consider what cities, considered from a broader perspective, can do in these respects. The second concept is the one that we mentioned multiple times today and in other occasions, the rule of law. Well, rule of law, as you certainly know, is a value of the European Union. You can find references to the rule of law in Article 2 to EU, the Treaty of the European Union. It's one of the values listed in these provisions. And I think that it is quite difficult to come to a definition of this concept, but the same applies to the majority of the values enshrined in Article 2 to EU. So I decided to refer to a regulation. It's Regulation 2020-2092 on a general regime of conditionality for the protection of the union budget. Here, the concept of rule of law is defined, and it is defined as follows. So I simply copied and pasted the definition provided for by this regulation, Article 2 of the regulation. Is it enough? No, it's not enough. And we can come to this conclusion by analyzing the case law of the European Court of Justice. In particular, the twin judgments of 2022, two infringement procedures against Hungary and Poland. And here, the European Court of Justice clarified that the concept of rule of law is broader than it seems if we look at this regulation. And to quote the court, that provision is not intended to define that concept exhaustively. That provision is Article 2 of the regulation that I mentioned before, but is limited to setting out for the sole purposes of that regulation a number of the principles which it covers and which are, according to the EU legislature, the most relevant in the light of the purpose of that regulation. And based on the case law of the European Court of Justice and relevant literature in EU law, we can infer that the rule of law is a sort of super value, basically encompassing all the other values enshrined in Article 2 to EU. Let me just give you an example. You open the webpage of the European Commission, and you find that the rule of law is the EU's fundamental value, guaranteeing is one of the EU fundamental values, guaranteeing democracy and citizens' rights and freedoms. So democracy and fundamental rights, which are two additional values included in Article 2 to EU. The interim conclusion is that we have two broad concepts to work on: urban environments on the one hand, and the rule of law on the other hand. Then, general considerations of a constitutional nature or a paraconstitutional nature on the relationship between cities, hearing Emanuela said before, and the rule of law. Why do cities matter in these respects under the law of the European Union? Why am I asking this question? The reason is quite simple. I think that based on general perception, the role of cities within the European Union and based on the law of the European Union is quite undermined. Cities are considered to be less important than national governments for obvious reasons if we consider the narrative applicable to this issue. However, there are some examples that, in my opinion, should be considered. They should be dealt with. That can be inferred by the constitutional architecture of the European Union. For example, this is quite trivial. Cities host the majority of the citizens of the European Union. But the citizens of the European Union are subjects of the law of the European Union, this legal order. And the European Court of Justice recently clarified that these status, the status of citizens of the European Union, is not just destined to be a fundamental one for the individuals bearing the citizenship of a member state. It's just a fundamental status. This was also clarified in the judgment concerning the infringement procedure against Malta and the selling of the European citizenship. But it was not the first time that the European Court of Justice said something like that. EU citizens, as you know, are represented by the European Parliament, and through the European Parliament and other channels, they have a chance to exercise the political rights that they benefit from. And according to Article 10 TEU, a key concept is the one of participative democracy. The treaty in this respect also adds that EU decisions should be taken as openly and as closely as possible to the citizens. Okay? So in this framework that, for obvious reasons, I had to summarize, the role of cities to protect and promote the rule of law and more in general the values of the European Union could be crucial. So let's not forget that cities have the possibility to be heard at the beginning of the legislative procedure whenever the European Union decides to carry out such an initiative. The European Commission drafts the proposal, and most of the time consultations are opened in a way that relevant stakeholders can have a say. This is something that local authorities can do. These are opportunities that should be taken, in my perspective. Bearing in mind that when the European Commission drafts the proposal, it explains the reasons why certain feedback have been disregarded. So the European Commission, based on impact assessments, clarifies which policy options have been chosen and the reasons behind that. Last but not least, cities and local authorities are represented at EU level. There is an advisory body, the Committee of Regions, which represents local and regional authorities across the European Union. It is an advisory body, we know that. It does not have the power to adopt binding acts. However, it shall be consulted most of the times when the legislative procedure goes on. This is provided for by the founding treaties of the European Union. I think, but it may be wrong, that it could be interesting to look at what happens outside of the European Union. Maybe some insights could be gathered from the reports of the European Commission concerning candidate countries. So countries that are negotiating their accession to the European Union. And this could be particularly important in the framework of this project, given the focus on Eastern Europe and Balkan states. In order to be accepted within the European Union, among the other things, and according to Article 49 TEU, the first condition is to respect and promote the values enshrined in Article 2 TEU. And that's great. However, in 1993, further criteria were added by the European Council. And one of these is the stability of institutions guaranteeing democracy, the rule of law, human rights, and respect for and protection of minorities. So if we go through these reports, we can find useful indications concerning specific aspects that at the end of the day are embodied by cities. There are specific sessions concerning elections, parliament, the integration, governance, civil society, and public administration with an emphasis on national courts, national judiciaries. and a side note on the role that national judiciaries can play, they are of utmost importance as far as the protection of the EU values is concerned, since they can, first of all, contribute, they must contribute to the uniform and right implementation of the law of the European Union. And in case of doubts, they have the power, let me say, to trigger the European Court of Justice via the preliminary ruling in order to make it appear on the scene. And that led to many important consequences in the past, but also in this period, as you certainly know. Just to say that local and regional authorities are in first line when it comes to identifying possible threats to the rule of law, especially at an early stage. Then a couple of strategies that were, designed by the European Union. The first one is the urban agenda for the European Union. In my view, I think it could be quite interesting to monitor the follow-up activities and initiatives concerning this strategy. The urban agenda for the European Union is a multi-level and multi-stakeholder cooperation mechanism. It involves the European Commission, national governments, local authority, plus relevant stakeholders. So cities are represented, of course, within this initiative. And the very aim of the initiative is to strengthen the urban dimension in EU policies. As you can see, there are three pillars upon which the initiative rests. The first one is promoting better laws, then promoting easier access to funding, and promoting more knowledge sharing on issues relevant for cities. Now, concerning better regulation, the thing is that most of the times cities have to implement the law of the European Union, but in doing so they struggle. So they have issues when it comes to the performance of this task. And given that these initiatives include 20 thematic partnerships, let me just recall one of them. This partnership is called the Cities of Equality. Its third action is collecting and exchanging best practices on citizen participation and co-governance methods, tools, and frameworks. The action can contribute to the European Commission's political priority, protecting our democracy, upholding our values. So I think that these initiatives and the set of activities connected to it should be monitored. The second strategy refers to the civic space of the European Union, with an emphasis on civil society organizations, CSOs. Why? Because civil society organizations are organizational structures which serve the general interest. They lay upon democratic processes, and they can mediate between public authority and citizens of a given community. They can play a major role as regards the engagement and participation of individuals in the political life, and they can foster legal mobilization, especially when it comes to the protection of fundamental rights. There is an issue behind the scene. The European Union was not well equipped to foster these subjects. There are constitutional constraints relating especially to the competences of the European Union. However, overall, the action of the European Union could contribute to strengthening their role as key contact points, and especially in an attempt to provide additional support for aligning national law to the law of the European Union. This is why a couple of relevant initiatives were taken over the last year. The first one is a communication of the European Commission, which was published in 2022, The second is represented by the conclusions of the Council of the European Union on the application of the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights and the role of the civic space in protecting and promoting fundamental rights. Conclusions of March 14, 2023. To conclude, a couple of external initiatives, just to underline the potential of a bottom-up approach. Two networks. The first one is Eurocities. Why Eurocities? Well, the reason is simple. It is the largest network of cities at the European level. It includes around 200 cities spread over some 30 states, if I'm not mistaken, and Bologna is in this network. It carries out a number of activities that mainly relate to the need of addressing global challenges at the local level. And they refer to a couple of categories of activities, for example, advocacy work on the one hand, through the support of thematic forums and the participation in projects, with a twofold aim. On the one hand, enabling cities to be equipped to respect the law of the European Union. On the other hand, allowing cities to be in a position to inspire decision-making processes, and also policy and decision makers more in general. For example, last year, if I remember correctly, a report was issued concerning the way cities can improve engagement in the European Union. The last consideration refers to the Pact of Free Cities. This is a peculiar network for at least two reasons. The first reason is that this network was established within the Visegrad area. It was created 6 years ago, yes, in 2019, by the mayors of the capitals of the Visegrad states. And I think that this is important in general, considering the position acquired by the Visegrad countries in the face of the European integration process, and also in the framework of our project for the reasons that I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation. This is global in ambition, and it is a value-driven network. In the sense that it carries out initiatives of different kind with a view to, promote and protect especially democracy vis-à-vis nationalistic populism. Cities are presented as, and I quote, hubs for progressive policies and pragmatic problem solvers against the reluctance, inability, or slowness of national governments to rise to global challenges. Now, it could be interesting, in my opinion, to have a look at the main documents published through this network, bearing in mind that over the last few years, the activities of the pacts of free cities slowed down a little bit. I think that the very last important moment was represented by a conference held at the beginning of 2023 on the rule of law. However, it was good to know that a few months ago, when the Istanbul mayor was arrested, the Pact of Free Cities resorted somehow and issued a statement to express profound concern over what was happening. And maybe the initiatives linked to this network will flourish again. If this is the case, I think it is worth monitoring what is happening and what will happen. Well, this concludes my intervention, and I hope I'm eager to get feedback from the audience, especially from the experts of different disciplines. I really thank you for the attention.
Thank you, Federico. Very deep intervention. Just a word to say that I wonder if from a legal and institutional point of view, it is really interesting, in my view, the position of cities beside the strategies in the relationship between the supranational and the national level. I'm wondering if the local entity, as you defined it, can change its status in future, especially regarding the dissemination of European values and the safeguard of human rights. Who knows? Okay, now is the time of Luca Sparnacci, Unione Province Italiane per l'Emilia-Romagna. The floor is yours. Luca, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to speak today on a topic that is both timely and fundamental: how local and intermediate authorities, such as provinces in Italy, can play a decisive role in promoting and defending the values of the European Union, in particular the rule of law, inclusion, and democratic participation. I am here today on behalf of UP Emilia-Romagna, the regional association of provinces, to present our initiative called Progetto Europa, but also to reflect more broadly on the institutional potential of provinces and on the relevance of knowledge and capacity building in public governance. Why provinces matter? Let me begin by saying a few words on the legal and constitutional basis of provinces in Italy, a level of government, the NUTS3 level, that is often misunderstood or underestimated, especially in the post-reform era. Post-reform, of course, Italian post-reform. Provinces are recognized by the Italian constitution as autonomous entities, forming part of the Republic. They hold their own powers and functions, regulatory autonomy, and fiscal capacity. Despite the attempted reforms of the last decade, which aimed to reduce their political relevance, provinces remain essential to the Italian administrative system. And they are not only essential legally, but functionally. They ensure coordination across municipalities, deliver services that individual towns cannot manage alone, such as school infrastructure, roads, local transport planning, environmental protection, and increasingly they mediate the relationship between local needs and national or European policies. From a European perspective, provinces fit squarely within the multi-level governance framework promoted by the EU. They are entitled to take part in shaping, implementing, and monitoring EU policies that directly affect citizens and territories. They are also mentioned as relevant actors in the European Charter of Local Self-Government and in many communications from the Commission on the future of cohesion and participatory democracy. Against this background, UP Emilia-Romagna launched Progetto Europa in 2021. It was not simply a project, but rather a long-term investment in territorial capacity. The goal was clear: to build a network of European offices across all the 8 provinces in the region, and we hope also with metropolitan city, each with dedicated staff responsible for identifying EU funding opportunities, supporting small and peripheral municipalities in project development, building partnerships across regions and borders, and facilitating access to regional, national, and EU-level programs. We wanted to ensure that no local government, no matter how small or remote, will be left behind in the European integration process. That, too, we believe, is a way of defending the rule of law by promoting equal access to opportunities, transparent funding procedures, and institutional accountability across territories. Oops. Thanks to the support of Emilia-Romagna regional government and the active commitment of provincial presidents, the project has become a model of territorial cooperation. We have trained local staff facilitate EU study visits to Brussels, and organize dialogues with members of the European Parliament and European Commission officials. In short, we have brought Europe closer to the local level and brought the local level into the European conversation. But our ambition goes beyond the funds and project. Project Europa is based on the belief that European values, democracy, equality, justice, the rule of law, must be lived and practiced locally, every day. Provinces are not just project managers. They are, by constitutional design, institutions that represent, coordinate, and care for the interests of their territories. They are the house of municipalities and a point of reference for civil servants, majors, local councils, especially in less accessible or rural areas. In this sense, the rule of law is not an abstract principle. It takes concrete form when a small municipality receives guidance or on how to implement a transparent public procurement process. A province offers legal and technical support for cross-border projects. These are micro-practices of democracy and legality, and they matter. They are the fabric of democratic governance and the territorial cohesion. Let me now share with you the contribution we will bring to this Trancityons project, an initiative which will happen between September and October 2025, a regional training course for public employees titled Inequalities, Institutions, and the Urban Context. This course, organized by UP EmiliaRomagna, is designed to help civil servants better understand the social and spatial dynamics of inequality and how public institutions can respond effectively. The course will be probably structured in 3 thematic modules, each focusing on different aspects of urban and institutional inequality. The first, Women and the City, an historical and social perspective, where we will explore the relationship between women and public space, looking at how cities have been historically gendered and how spatial design can reproduce or challenge forms of exclusion. Topics include the historical role of women in urban planning and public life, gendered use and perceptions of urban spaces, and democratization of public space. The second module, called Designing for All, Inclusive Urban Policies and Tools, will focus on concrete urban policy instruments that promote accessibility, equality, and sustainability. We will discuss urban design with a gender perspective, policy frameworks that reduce spatial inequality, examples of inclusive planning from Italy and abroad. The third and last module is called Art, Experience, and Activism in the Urban Realm. And we look at how urban transformation can also come from below through art, cultural memory, and activism. And there we will analyze participatory practices and civic engagement, the role of arts in urban regeneration, future perspectives for inclusive city making. Our goal with this course is to go beyond technical training. We want to create a space for reflection, awareness, and innovation where public servants can explore how their daily work intersects with issues of justice, accessibility, and inclusion. In doing so, we reinforce the idea that local institutions are not neutral actors. They are political and social agents, and they carry responsibility in promoting the EU's founding values: dignity, equality, solidarity, and the rule of law. We believe this is a fundamental dimension of defending the rule of law, empowering public officials to recognize and address inequalities, ensuring that institutions are perceived as legitimate, transparent, and responsive. To conclude, I would like to offer a broader reflection. Promoting EU values is not only a matter for central governments or judicial institutions. It requires the active involvement of local and intermediate authorities, of trained civil servants, of resilient public administrations that can engage with citizens, listen, coordinate, and innovate. Provinces, as demonstrated by EmiliaRomagna model, are ideally placed to play this role. They can bridge the gap between institutions and territories, between Brussels and the Apennines, between principles and practices. Local authorities do not just implement policies, they shape communities, and it is through them that citizens turn in times of crisis, need, and hope. The solutions to the many challenges faced by our societies start at local level, where the power of proximity and trust is exercised. But to do so, they need recognition, resources, and political support. We believe that projects like Project Europa and initiatives like the upcoming training course represent a modest but meaningful contribution to that vision, a Europe that is closer, more just, more inclusive, and more democratic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Luca. What you said convinced me once more respect of what I said before about local entities and their role. So not only cities, okay, but all the local entities in the legal order. Okay, so thank you very much again for your perspective. Now it's last but not least, it's the time of Olivia Pini. 15 minutes for you, Olivia. Maybe something more because Luca just was really
brief,
short, so you can have your time. And thank you very much for being here once again.
Thank you very much, Professor Claudia Golino, for also for the coordination of the project. Thank you very much to Leonardo and Francesca for their precious coordination, organization, and back office work, which is very heavy, I think. I apologize, I don't have any slide, but I assure that my speech would be very brief, most of all because it is the last before the lunch break. So maybe at the end I can do like the politicians and say, now is the time for lunch, okay? So first of all, again, I join the former speakers in thanking also the audience for being here today in this really very rich and interesting morning. Our project focus lies on both concepts of transition in the urban context and the role of the cities implementing democratic values. So as we use the concept of transition, we immediately evoke an issue, a phenomenon in its becoming, let me say. So in other words, a phenomenon in its dynamic and historical dimension. As we refer and we take a theme, an issue, and we refer it to the past, and then analyze it in the present and try to predict and provide for its future development. So my scientific interest in the project, as long as the very rich and compelling presentations and the speeches held in the first and in the second panel, mainly focus on the role of cities in the past and constitutional transition and in the European transition to democratic values, inspired me in reflecting on some of the persistent tensions we all can experiment in urban context today, which outline an unstable condition of legal systems and societal contexts struggling to find a balance in implementing democratic values. Think, for example, about the tension between roots and identity and belonging or membership, or the tension between stasis and movement we experiment inside urban context, or another important tension between memory and destination, as cities are linked to the past, but always heading to the future. Following the diachronic structure of transition, I too would like to briefly dwell and reflect on three analytical perspectives of the profound connection between city, citizenship, and democracy, specifically focusing my attention on why and how cities still can be today the main actors of daily-based building democracy process, most of all in the perspective of building a common European identity founded on Article 2 of the European Union Treaty values, such as respect for human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality, rule of law, respect for human rights, pluralism, solidarity, equality between women and men. And then I would like to conclude my speech with some random thoughts about the role of the public dimension in these urban democratic transitions, wondering if we still have to acknowledge the importance of public space, or if we should instead prefer and enhance the concept of public sphere instead of place, space and place. So first of all, we should wonder where this assumption comes from, an assumption we perceive as deeply aligned with reality also today, that cities have always represented the main building blocks of democratization, the unit of measurement of democracy. Cities have always played a central role in the organization of societies, even before the rise of modern states, as they are lived space. So they are spaced, but strictly linked with the population. So places where human experience has been concentrated since the very origins of organized societies. From this point of view, we can state for sure that democracy is a situated form of state and form of government. Moreover, cities have long been and continue to be spaces where both traditional and new forms of coexistence are tested, forms that today require a redefinition of the concept of citizenship. This is a very urgent issue. Urban contexts are in fact privileged sites for the formation of movements, for the growth of associative experiences and participatory practices, as well as places of memory for the past demands and for the past struggles, as we heard before. In this aspect, if this aspect mainly refers to the past, so here we are in the first of the dimension of the transition, from a present-day perspective, the city is increasingly the main actor on the global stage. Urban contexts are sensitive indicators of the major changes underway. Just think of the location of major centers of commerce, of power, of economy, and of finance. They are all located in urban context. In cities, new political experiences arise. Forms of insurgent citizenship take shape, new democratic practices are experimented with, and their evolutionary nature is part of a deeply rooted history of transformation and adaptation. More than that, the structures and organization of the city are and must increasingly be the privileged expression of the social, economic, and cultural pluralism that constitutes an essential tool for the sustainability of modern democracies, especially where they experiment crisis or decline. In this sense, indeed, not only cities and local dimensions in general have a so-called pivotal role, so they are they have to foresee in defending and promoting the rule of law, but they are also the first one to suffer from the lack of the rule of law in a country, as Federico said before, due to the proximity with the communities of individuals. Then looking toward the futures and the potential outcomes of the ongoing transition, it can be said that cities today represent the living agent, so the primary engine of transformation. Every change that takes shape at the urban level is inevitably meant to spread exponentially to broader context, including national and also supranational levels. In this sense, recognizing the city as a significant institutional actor, even within the European Union, of course, is increasingly crucial for reinforcing the idea of bottom-up democracy, or more precisely, of a networked, or in other words, reticular democracy. So urban reticularity, this networking, is a fundamental element in consolidating and strengthening the resilience of democratic form of state, based on the premise that the city is the beating heart of innovation and the collective growth of the political community, enhancing social cohesion and reducing marginalization. And here I would like to cite, to remember some initiatives which were mainly spontaneous for equal distribution, solidarity, subsidiarity, sustainability, and inclusive cities, such as the Pact of Free Cities that Federico cited before, but also the model of the transitions town, which are a spontaneous initiative arised for sustainability, mutualism, cooperation, sharing of goods, association, and solidarity. So coming to the second part of the speech, let me begin with a citation with the beginning of a very famous Greek tragedy, which is the Antigone from Sophocles, which begins saying that a city which is of a man alone is not a city. So the city is built upon relationships, upon pluralism, upon plurality. Starting from this fundamental premise, it must be emphasized that the concept of the city does not have a univocal definition, but rather has at least two historical antecedents that highlight very different aspects. On one hand, we have the Greek concept of polis, which is centered on the creation of an urban community based on a shared identity, very strong identity, a sense of common belonging and common roots. On the other hand, the Roman notion of city is civitas, where is instead focused on the relationship against citizens, linked around an idea of building a city, subjecting themselves to the same laws, regardless of their different origins, backgrounds, ethnicities, and languages. So we don't have the concept of identity in the Roman idea of city, of civitas, but we have a strong idea of relationship, of people hanging with a common purpose. If we were asked to ourselves which of these two concepts might be more functional today in defending and advancing democratic values, while of course the symbolic role that certain spaces and urban spaces most of all still play in shaping collective identities cannot be overlooked, it would seem that it is the second approach, so is the Roman concept of city, which is more compelling. This vision, grounded in the idea of the city as a space capable of integrating diversity, of stably combining different identities, and of projecting itself into the future by building harmony among its inhabitants, appears to be more relevant. Indeed, what really deserves to be highlighted as central and modern, also in the European overlooking, is the idea that what unites people is not something original or innate, or maybe it's not only something original, but rather a common purpose, one that can belong to everyone. So this can help in the dissolution of what we call the urban identities that work as obstacles to integration. Finally, a brief reflection on the role that should be assigned to the public. Public, as we refer to public, we can refer to public power, public bodies, public space in this transformative and transitional context. The value of public space lies in its capacity to collectively organize a sphere of mediation between subjectivities, collectives, differences, and experiences. It is the place where problems are reported and named, where tension and conflicts emerge, and where solutions are sought. In public space, physical, territorial, and relational dimension can coexist. But primarily, public space, it must be understood in its political dimension, in which the plural nature of human beings and the world they inhabit is revealed, in the indispensable presence of others who participate, witness, respond, react, or even oppose decisions. It is within this conception that the unique experience of the polis is valued as an experience of dialogue in a collective space. This is why the city, as the privileged space of the political, and by its inherently relational nature, is a construction site for democracy. The city is the context in which democratic possibilities are tested and emerging modes of access to citizenship are explored. In this sense, it can be defined as a laboratory of global politics. Upon closer examination, as I said at the beginning, this context may perhaps be better described by the concept of the public sphere, not only public space. Public sphere is a term that allows us to identify the totality of spaces for civic and political participation, for collective life in the end. As Habermas said in his book, The Public Sphere, the public sphere refers to the space of our social life in which what leads to public opinion can be formed. So today, the sphere can develop, and often does, outside the traditional public space. Just think, for example, of the role of new technologies which can create virtual, non-physical, plural, and polycentric spaces. So the main target for institutions then, in this process of transition, is to contribute to symbolically establishing within a framework of responsibility a common world, a shared world. The true challenge, so, is not merely to coordinate individual and collective actions, so not only a coordination role, but to embrace and enhance the city's polyphony, the capacity to exist within an intermediate space, as we call the in-between, using a concept from Hannah Arendt in The Human Condition. So as the place that both connects and separates. This is the concept of in-between. It's the place that both connects and separates, enhancing the differences. So though unstable, this space is where we experience encounters with others and the plural condition of humanity. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Olivia, for your speech. It was very dense and also of theoretical points. At the end of the morning, so we are almost to the lunchtime. So just few words just to conclude this morning and the two panels that we heard since now. From what we said until now, I would like to recall the centrality of the keywords that I just show you at the beginning of my intervention. We approach the concept of transition from a critical perspective. We just meditate on it, just calling transformation or transition. Paul Blokker just underline the concept of transition in this way. We situate the transition within the urban context, the context of cities. We talked about public space in the city, considering the public space not only a local space, but maybe a public sphere instead. So this changes the perspective of the physical space that we are used to think about. And we tried to understand the importance of the gender dimension in cities. And we try to somehow grasp a transformation that tend toward the democratic space. So I think that we made our work this morning. It's the beginning of the conference, it's the beginning of the project, but I think that the perspective that is giving it to us is very deep, challenging, and very interesting. So I really want to thank all the people that stayed with us this morning, and we have lunch downstairs in the Giardino d'Inverno, Boschereccia.